Senator Bernie Sanders announced that he will be holding a vote to subpoena the head of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, also known as the union-busting CEO of Starbucks, of course. If the subpoena passes, meaning if he's actually issuing the subpoena and a hearing takes place, it would lead to a showdown, okay, between the best progressive in Congress, hands down, Senator Sanders, and one of labor's biggest enemies, especially at the moment, considering the labor-busting, union-busting efforts that we've seen from Schultz in recent months. Now, specifically, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, also known as the HELP Committee, will be voting on the subpoena, right? So that's what we mean when we say if the subpoena passes. Bernie is, in fact, the head of that committee. And here's what Bernie says. He says that the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, has filed over 75 complaints against Starbucks for violating federal labor law. And there have been over 500 unfair labor practice charges lodged against Schultz's company. The violations include illegal firing of more than a dozen Starbucks workers. For nearly a year, Bernie says, I and many of my colleagues in the Senate have repeatedly asked Mr. Schultz to respect the constitutional rights of workers at Starbucks, to form a union, and to stop violating federal labor laws. He has denied meeting and document requests, skirted congressional oversight attempts, and refused to answer any of the serious questions we have given him. Unfortunately, Bernie says, Mr. Schultz has given us no choice but to subpoena him. Man, it feels good to see a real progressive, someone who really wants to fight for labor, head an incredibly important Senate committee like this. So Bernie also reintroduced the PRO Act, something that I feel pretty much every other lawmaker has completely forgotten about. The PRO Act would have bolstered the rights of labor in this country. Now, if you've missed the reporting on the Starbucks unionization efforts, I think it's important to fill you in on it and for everyone else to get a little bit of a refresher, because they have good reason to want to unionize and have a seat at the table. Let's watch.
The communication between higher ups and our stores started to become non-existent. They introduced so many new things like components to drinks, mobile orders, deliveries. We were never given the tools to make that happen properly. We were doing all this extra work and we weren't getting paid for what we think that we were worth.
Certainly sounds familiar. A lot of American workers can relate to that, but some of the workers over at Starbucks decided, we're gonna fight back. Power in numbers, we're gonna unionize. And to be sure, Starbucks executives have been trying to squash those efforts. And when it comes to the stores that did succeed in unionizing, they won't sit down and engage in good faith contract negotiations, which, by the way, is against the law. And that's why Bernie wants to call Howard Schultz to a hearing, subpoena him and ask him some questions. Now, here's the latest on the labor struggles at Starbucks. Starbucks workers have succeeded in unionizing 278 stores. It's incredible. Now, the unionizing workers just got some support from some of their colleagues on a corporate level. So the corporate Starbucks employees have sent them an open letter, and what they're arguing is that not only do they deserve the support, but some of these corporate Starbucks employees are dealing with labor issues of their own. So the 4 dozen who signed this letter of support to the unionizing workers say that they're upset about the company's return to office policy, and they're also upset about the rampant union busting. Now, they say, we love Starbucks, but these actions are fracturing trust in Starbucks leadership. Morale is at an all-time low, and the brand reputation and financial value of this publicly traded company are at risk. The letter follows an internal survey last year that showed corporate staff's faith in the company's ethics and social impact fell to historic lows amid the union fight and return to office policies. Now, one employee who signed the letter also said, quote, a lot of people just want to have their grievances and their demands aired and hope for change. If it doesn't lead to any meaningful change, then the next step is obviously to think about possibly unionizing. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's the reason why these companies, these executives don't want the workers to unionize. Because once you have some protection, once you have a union, once you have a union that potentially has a strike fund that can sustain you if you do decide to strike against the company, you've got a little bit of power, you got a little bit of leverage, and you have more of a say over your working conditions and also how much you get paid. Now, the workers also got another big win this week. Austin Locke, who was one of the union organizers at his Starbucks store in New York, was fired shortly after the company heard word of his organizing efforts. But it turns out that he's been reinstated. The authorities basically say, no, he was illegally fired, he must be reinstated, and he was reinstated to his position with over $20,000 of back pay and penalties. So this is what the NLRB does. This is why the NLRB is important. This is why right-wing conservatives despise the NLRB, because when the NLRB works the way it's supposed to, the National Labor Relations Board, it provides protections for workers who are retaliated against for practicing their rights in the workplace, including organizing their workplace. That said, the Starbucks workers have yet to reach a first contract with the company because, of course, the company doesn't want to engage in those negotiations. Starbucks representatives have walked out on dozens of negotiating sessions. Currently, there's no federal law that punishes companies for negotiating in bad faith. And meanwhile, Howard Schultz is making his shareholders real happy, real happy. So according to company filings reviewed by More Perfect Union, the first fiscal quarter of 2023, the company repurchased $1.9 million in shares of its common stock, valued together at $191.4 million. Starbucks forecasted that it would return $20 billion to shareholders by the end of fiscal year 2025 between regular buybacks and dividends. Because that's what matters here, the investors. Not the workers who are generating the revenue on behalf of Starbucks, the investors who park their money in the company, sit back and expect to get a nice return for doing nothing more than providing capital. That's how the system works. They're apparently more important than the very workers who are generating the revenue in the first place. The workers strike. How do you generate the revenue? That's what the executives are concerned about. But you could prevent a strike by actually treating your workers well. And whether Howard Schultz likes it or not, this wave of unionizing has taken off, and I hope it continues. Because really, if you're waiting for lawmakers to protect you, it ain't gonna happen. Sometimes you do have to take matters into your own hands. There is power in numbers, and when you look at this country's history, and the economic booms that this country experienced, especially in the 50s, it was mostly because of unionized labor. It was because of labor power. It wasn't because they happened to elect the right people in Congress. You can elect all the right people in Congress, but the system sucks them in and they do exactly what you see progressives doing in Congress right now. Pretty much nothing, with the exception of Bernie Sanders. You need an outside pressure campaign, and you get that through organized workers.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.